On a table in a small house on the coast of Mie Prefecture, there is a mug of cocoa. It is half finished. According to accounts of the case, it was still warm when it was found. The child who had been drinking it was 8 years old. She was in the 2nd grade. Somewhere in the 90 minutes between that mug and the moment her older sister opened the front door, she left the house and did not come back. Her jacket stayed behind. Her bicycle stayed by the door. Nobody on that street reported hearing a car or a shout or anything at all. More than 35 years later, the police in Mie Prefecture are still asking the public for help finding her. The notice they published is astonishingly short. A name, a birthday, a time of day, a pale blue blouse with polka dots, a light brown skirt, black vinyl shoes, and a phone number that still connects. That single page is very merely the entire official record of one of Japan's most talked about missing child cases. Outside Japan, almost nobody has ever heard of it. To understand how a child could vanish in daylight without a single witness who could be sure of what they saw, you have to understand the place. Yokkaichi sits on Ise Bay in Mie Prefecture, about an hour south of Nagoya. For most of the 20th century, it was known for one thing: chemistry. The refineries and petrochemical complexes built along its shoreline after the war made the city prosperous, and they made it famous for the wrong reason. The respiratory illness that spread through the neighborhoods downwind became known nationally by the city's own name. The district she lived in is called Tomida, in the north of the city. Before the war, it was not part of Yokkaichi at all. It was its own town, a fishing port on the bay, with a whaling history behind it, absorbed into the growing city in 1941. By 1991, it had become something in between. There was still a working harbor. There was still a small river, the Jushigawa, running through it, with a levee path that fills with cherry blossom every April, and locals who walk it every year. And directly beside all of that, across the district line, stood the third of the great industrial complexes, burning and venting round the clock. It was a neighborhood of narrow residential streets where families knew each other, wedged between fishing boats and refinery flare stacks. Children walked to school in groups and came home alone. It was, by every ordinary measure, a safe place to be 8 years old. March 15, 1991 was a Friday in the last weeks of the Japanese school year, graduation season. Classes finished early. What follows now comes almost entirely from accounts of the case rather than from any document the police have released. Where that is true, we will say so. By these accounts, she walked back from her elementary school with friends, separated from them near home, and reached the house at around 2 o'clock. One account has a friend remembering that she mentioned a promise she had to keep. What that promise was, if it was ever said at all, has never been established. At around 2:30, her mother telephoned the house from her part-time job to say she would be late. They spoke. That phone call matters more than anything else in this story, because it is the one part of the afternoon that official record confirms. Mie Prefectural Police give the time of her disappearance as around 2:30 in the afternoon. In other words, the police also treat that conversation as the last moment anyone is known to have been in contact with her. Her father, who worked nights, was asleep in the house. Her older sister came home in the late afternoon and found the rooms empty and the cocoa on the table unfinished. She assumed her younger sister had gone out to play. Her father woke, made the same assumption, and left for work. Neither assumption was unreasonable. A child going out to play on a Friday afternoon is not an event. But two things did not fit, and they still do not fit. It was cold in mid-March. The jacket she habitually wore outdoors was reportedly still in the house, and her bicycle, the thing she took everywhere, was still there too. By 8 o'clock that evening, the family had reported her missing. Neighbors and school staff were out with flashlights before midnight, calling her name along streets they had known their whole lives. What happened next was not a small search. The figures that circulate put it at roughly 480 police officers, around 730 volunteers drawn from neighborhood associations and the School Parents Association, and something like 27,000 flyers distributed across a radius of more than 10 kilometers. The Coast Guard is said to have joined it, sending patrol boats across the harbor and a helicopter over the water. They searched the riverbanks. They searched the irrigation channels that thread through that part of the city. They searched the fishing port and the bay beyond it. Nothing was found. Not a shoe, not a hair ribbon, not one object that could be connected to her. Some information did surface, and it is worth being precise about how thin it is. Around 4:30 that afternoon, roughly 9 schoolchildren reported seeing a girl alone on the climbing frame in the elementary school grounds. 2 of them said they had also seen a girl who looked like her walking east along the road on top of the river levee, away from the school gate. Separately, a white light van is described as having been parked on the street perhaps 70 to 100 meters east of her house that afternoon, with a man standing near it. In that account, he walked off, came back several minutes later with the girl, sat talking with her inside the vehicle for around 10 minutes, and then drove away. There were also reports of sightings near the local railway station, where the main line meets a small branch railway running inland. Every one of those reports came from ordinary people trying to be helpful about an ordinary afternoon they had no reason to memorize. Not one of them was ever confirmed to have been her. The van was never traced. The man was never identified. No vehicle, no person, and no location was ever tied to her disappearance, and no one has ever been arrested or charged in connection with this case. For 3 years, nothing happened at all, and then something arrived at the family's house. It was an anonymous letter. In Japanese, there is a specific word for a document like this, kaibunsho, which means roughly a strange or unattributable text, and it carries an unease that our translation loses. Accounts describe 3 sheets of paper, written first in pencil and then traced over in ballpoint pen, in a shaky, uneven hand that some have suggested was produced with the writer's wrong hand. The Japanese was broken, mixing scripts, semi-legible in places and not legible at all in others. It was addressed to her father, but it misspelled his given name. It appeared to be about the missing child, but it misspelled her name too, opening with a phrase along the lines of, "About Miyuki, poor Miyuki, poor Miyuki." Scattered through the rest of it were fragments that people have argued over ever since. A reference that seems to point to the district she lived in, and then, strangely, references to places far to the north, out beyond Japan entirely, in the cold seas above the Sea of Japan. Nobody has ever decoded it into anything that could be acted on. Whether the police were ever able to authenticate it, and whether the version circulating publicly is even an accurate transcription, has never been established. Accounts do not agree on how many letters arrived. Then, in October of 2003, 12 years after she vanished, the telephone rang at the family home. A man's voice. He described himself physically, and in doing so, he used a detail that matched the description of the man reported near the van. Some accounts state that this particular detail had never been released to the public. The call was short, it could not be traced, it produced nothing. And there is a deflating possibility that has to be said out loud. That detail may well have circulated anyway, through early press coverage or through the door-to-door interviews police conducted across the neighborhood. If so, anyone in that district could have known it. The call may have been nothing but cruelty. So what do we actually have here? Let me set the theories against each other using a single measure: the objects left in that house. The first possibility is that she was taken from near her home by a stranger. The reported van, the reported promise, and the abandoned jacket and bicycle all fit a child who stepped outside for what she believed would be 1 minute. It explains the objects better than anything else does. What it cannot explain is the total absence of physical trace across a search of that size. The second is that she went out on her own and met someone on the way. This fits the reported sightings on the Levee Road, and it fits the station, but it argues against the objects. A child walking a real distance on a cold March afternoon takes the bicycle, or at least the coat. The third is an accident near water. That district is threaded with a river, irrigation channels, a harbor, and the open bay. And an 8-year-old alone near water is a genuine risk, not a dramatic one. Against it, patrol boats and a helicopter covered exactly that water, and nothing was ever recovered. Here is what strikes me most, though, and it is not about any of those three. Look again at what is officially documented. One police notice, a name, a birthday, a time, and what she was wearing. That is close to the whole of it. Every other detail in this episode, including the ones the entire internet now treats as settled fact, comes from accounts passed hand to hand for 30 decades. The warm cocoa, the jacket, the 9 children at the climbing frame, even the widely repeated claim that the limitation period ran out in 2006 cannot be confirmed against any official source, and it sits oddly beside the fact that Mie Prefectural Police are still publicly asking for information today. That is the real shape of this case. Not a locked room, but a memory that has slowly replaced its own evidence. And the longer that goes on, the harder it becomes to know what anyone would even be looking for. No one has ever been arrested. No trace of her has ever been recovered. There has never been a demand, a claim, or confession that led anywhere. What remains is that short official notice, still online, still asking. Yokkaichi Kita Police Station is still listed as the place to call, along with any nearby police station or neighborhood police post. She was born in May of 1982. If she is alive somewhere in the world tonight, she is 44 years old. I keep coming back to the ordinariness of it. Not the letter, not the phone call, not the van, the mug on the table. A child who was in the middle of something, who fully intended to finish it. What do you think happened in that house on that Friday afternoon? And which of the details we all repeat about this case would you still believe if you knew it had never been written down anywhere official?